Anyone who's ever done anything worth doing has dreamed big, failed mightily, and mostly started from humble beginnings. This is a podcast about such people. The most fascinating podcast in the world is fascinating because of the stories of the human beings. Hello, it's Pat DiCerbo, the most fascinating podcast in the world. Nothing to do with me. It's the guests on the show that make it so. Today I'm with Joey McKenna. Joey is one of the winningest wrestlers in the sport. Since he was a very small child, he's been wrestling. Eventually went to high school at Blair Academy, which is a nationally known wrestling program, and ultimately was ranked #1 in America as a high schooler. Out of high school, Joey wrestled for 2 years at Stanford. He was a 2-time Pac-12 champion and 1-time NCAA All-American. Subsequent to Stanford, Joey spent 2 years at Ohio State and was a 2-time All-American, placing 3rd as a junior and 2nd as a senior. Joey has wrestled after college on the international scene and has wrestled in the U.S. Open, finishing 2nd in the U.S. Open World Team Trials, and in the Olympic trials, finishing 2nd, and has been a 5-time U.S. national team member. He has also been a 2-time Pan Am champion, gold medalist, and has won so many tournaments that we'd be here a long time if we talked about all of them. So welcome, Joey.
Thanks for having me on, Pat. Looking forward to, as always, just a great conversation with you.
Thank you. I appreciate it, and likewise. So when we were talking the other day, I asked you about some of your earliest memories of your life, and you were telling me about growing up in New Jersey, and I wondered if you could talk about that a little bit, some of your earliest memories.
Yeah, of the sport or just being a Jersey kid?
Your life, being a Jersey kid, your family, your mom and dad, your sisters, and then how you got into wrestling eventually.
Yeah. So I grew up in Montville Township. I lived there my entire life. And, I have 2 wonderful sisters, one above me, one older, one younger. I like to say I'm the cream in the middle of the Oreo. And 2 really supportive, loving parents that have continued to support my sisters and I and whatever endeavors we pursue throughout our entire lives. But I started wrestling at the age of 7, and my older sister at the time was a high-level gymnast. Being 2 years older, she was 9. And, wrestling and gymnastics, I would say, are similar sports in that they're pretty intense at a young age. And so I definitely got to see that in my older sister, how much dedication and commitment and discipline that she had in pursuing her goals of being a high-level gymnast. And when I got inserted into wrestling because of my older cousins who wrestled, my dad also wrestled in high school. I was introduced to the sport and I started to love it. One thing that I remember from my first ever wrestling competition is I walked into this competition at St. John Vianney High School in New Jersey, and I was in shorts and a t-shirt and street shoes. I didn't own a pair of wrestling shoes yet. I didn't have a singlet yet. So I wasn't in proper outfit for a wrestling competition and probably not a proper skill level to even be competing. But I was put into the competition, and my first match, I ended up losing, but I walked off the mat and my dad started to try to console me. And he said, "Oh, bud, it's okay." And I said, "Did you see that?" He's like, "See what?" I'm like, "I gave that kid a bloody nose." And I walked off the mat with so much joy in somehow inflicting pain on my opponent and giving him a bloody nose that, I just remember that memory from my first ever experience wrestling. And it was fun. I lost the match, so I didn't win. So I didn't find the enjoyment from winning, but I think I found it from the fight and just the test of myself and the test of character of staying in the fight and wrestling the entire time. And I don't recall getting pinned, but like I said, all I remember is the joy I had walking off the mat. And it's one thing that I try to think about and keep with me as I pursue the sport 21 years later as a 28-year-old, is to remember that little kid walking out there with shorts and a t-shirt and no wrestling shoes, but the enjoyment and fun that I had in the experience, and to try to replicate that with just a renewed mindset, having all the knowledge and everything experience that I've gained through the sport, but still remembering to be a little kid that just wanted to have fun out there.
Mm-hmm. So you wrestled in that first tournament, and that was with your dad. Did your dad take you to most of the tournaments early on, or was that your
Yeah,
mom?
I had a very interesting dynamic. So my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and my dad worked, and so he brought home the bacon. And so for me, during the weeks, my mom would take me to my wrestling practices. And looking back on it now, I give her all the credit in that she was my trainer. She was my coach. She sought out the wrestling clubs in the local area that had good partners, that had, more importantly, good coaches. And she started surrounding me with like-minded individuals. And I wouldn't have known it at the time, but when I reflect back and look at my career, she brought me out to Ohio to sleepaway camps at Team Moran. She was bringing me to Jeff Jordan camps. She would drive me down on the weekends to Maryland to work with Kerry Colott. And so she was really doing the most and was doing her research on what it takes to get to the next level of wrestling. But when it came time for the weekends and the competitions, my dad was free. So my dad would take me to most of my competitions, even though he wasn't at many of my practices.
Mm.
But I think it was awesome and important for me to really create that bond with my dad that kids and their dads have when they're playing little league sports and in any sport, right? That bond of, my dad wrestled, so he was going to try to pour into me as much as he could. But one thing I always appreciate about that is really what my dad cared about in competing. One thing he made really apparent to me was that he didn't care about whether I won or lost. He cared about my effort and my attitude and if I gave it my all. When I walked off the mat and my dad was upset, I knew there was a good reason. It
Mm.
wasn't about just winning or losing, executing a technique. It was more about my will, my effort, and my attitude towards going and competing. There'd even be matches where I would win, but he would be upset after because he knew I didn't give it my all. And I would win, but I didn't give it my all. And he really worked hard through that time to instill the right characteristics and you know, the intrinsic values of wrestling that are really instilled through the sport.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think we had a pretty good dynamic of my mom being, my coach, taking us to practice. She was juggling my older sister at gymnastics, me at wrestling practice, my younger sister at softball practice. And so she was juggling a lot and making sure that we did everything we needed. And my dad was that encouragement, but really, disciplining us on being proper humans, being proper sports, right? Being a good competitor, so to
Mm.
speak. And, I think he has, through his wrestling career, but also his business career, he knows what being a competitor is like and the important values of that. And so he really did a great job of helping me and my sisters all kind of cling to those lessons that we learned through sports at a young age.
Mm. Were you good at wrestling right out of the gate, or did it take some time?
Um, I'd say that I started to see success pretty early. My first year of wrestling, I qualified for the state tournament, the youth states in New Jersey, and I didn't place. But my second year of wrestling, I made the state finals.
Mm.
And I wrestled a household name in the state of New Jersey, Anthony Ashnault. He was
Mm.
already at that point a 3 or 4 time kid state champ. Keep in mind, we're only about 8 years old at this point. So he's been wrestling since he was 4. I started when I was 7. And it's funny, at a young age, experience means a lot. I remember always asking people, well, how long have you been wrestling? If I lost to somebody, how long have you been wrestling? Right? Because experience and number of years was the telltale sign of, all right, it's okay to lose to that guy. So in that second year of wrestling, I took second in the States. I lost to Anthony Ashnault by 1 point, and he was already a 3 or 4 time kid state champ, like I said. So my, I was happy with the loss. I was happy with the improvement that I saw from not placing a year earlier to taking second. Um, and even my parents were happy, right? They'd seen the growth over about a year and a half's time and knew that I might be pretty good at this sport. Fast forward one more year to my third year of wrestling, I made the state finals again to Anthony Ashnault. And now that I was in my third year, I ended up losing, and this time it wasn't okay.
Mm.
And I think part of the reason why it wasn't okay was probably exactly what I talked about with my dad being upset when I came off the mat was I don't think I handled myself correctly. I don't think I gave it my all. I was wrestling very tight and tentative because I wanted to win so bad that, he'd rather see me give everything I have and lose than hold back and still lose. At least
Mm.
you go down swinging, you go down trying, and that was one thing. But that was within the state. I started going to national competitions in that third year of wrestling. I took fourth at the Tulsa Nationals, which is a big little kids event. That's how you really knew if you were a high level competitor or not, was placing at the national tournament in Tulsa. And so I started to see success from then on. After that third year of wrestling, I never lost the state finals after that in my youth days. Um, and I just always started having success in the sport, both in the state and nationally.
Mm. Did you ever beat Ashnault in grade school or high school?
Um, So we wrestled in middle school, and I ended up beating him in that competition. And then from that point on, we never wrestled in high school because he went to South Plainfield, which wrestled in the New Jersey State Tournament,
Mm-hmm.
and I attended Blair Academy. And we didn't wrestle, although we're in New Jersey. It was a prep school, and so we had students from out of state, so we weren't allowed to compete at the state tournament, but we could compete at the national prep tournament. So
Mm-hmm.
I ended up being a 3 time national prep champ in my high school career.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then actually my first year of college when I All-American for Stanford, Anthony Ashnault and I wrestled for third and fourth at the NCAA tournament in Madison Square Garden.
Mm.
And I would say that that match had a lot of pride on the line, a lot of Jersey pride. Um, People always talked about in high school what would have happened if these two would have wrestled, and people definitely wanted to see that matchup. So for us to have that at the NCAA tournament, homegrown in Madison Square Garden, I was out at Stanford at the time, so it felt like a homecoming event. And he was wrestling for Rutgers, so to beat the Jersey guy, pretty much in Jersey, felt really good. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, since those youth days, I've actually never taken a loss to him.
Oh, that's great. What was the score of that third and fourth place match? Do you remember?
I believe it was a 1 point match. It was either 6-5 or 7-6.
Mm.
But it was a really close match down to the wire. And definitely, I don't celebrate much after wins, and I feel like when I do, it's pure raw emotion. I try to kind of keep those things contained a little bit. I like to think keep the fire
Mm.
inside. But when it comes out, I know it's real. I know it's raw. It's pure. And so I give myself some slack on
Mm-hmm.
celebrations like that.
Mm-hmm. So you went to Blair. You had a lot of success there. How did you end up deciding what to do after that?
Yeah. So in choosing to go to Blair Academy and forgoing the New Jersey State tournament and making that
Mm-hmm.
decision out of middle
Mm-hmm.
school, um, was mainly because Blair was nationally ranked. They were
Mm-hmm.
the number one team in the country. They had multiple guys on their teams that were ranked number one nationally. And I had this mindset of, I don't want to be a state champ. I want to be a national champ. I don't care about the states. I want to be number one in the country. And so that was why I chose to go to Blair. And so it was definitely a high level wrestling program for being in high school.
Mm-hmm.
I equate the training that we were doing to a college program as a culture on the team. We had a college wrestling type culture, the way we train, our mentality, and our group mentality that we all embodied. Um, but through my time at Blair, it was also a prep school. So we were all pretty smart guys. We took AP classes, taken honors courses. And I started to see when I was a freshman at Blair, a lot of my senior and junior teammates committing to schools like within the Ivy League, Harvard, Cornell, Princeton, Penn, Stanford. And we started we had this mindset of, we're grinding, we're wrestling hard, but let's use wrestling to take us to the best universities in the world. The wrestling gives us an opportunity to attend these schools where, likewise, just based on our academic merit, we may not get into, but with the sport and with that opportunity of college athletics, this is a great opportunity. So I would say that started to narrow down my focus when I became a junior and senior to looking at Ivy League schools, schools like Stanford, um, and Lehigh was the one great school, but amongst the Ivy Leagues in Stanford, right, comparably may have been lower tier. But I had a personal coach that was working there at the time, Coach Jeff Buxton, who's been very influential in my career. And so that it was close to home. I was training there in high school, so it was a big draw. But ultimately, when I narrowed down my decision, I was looking at three Ivy Leagues, Stanford and Lehigh. And I had this realization about halfway through my recruiting process. And I looked at the schools that I was looking at. It was Penn, Princeton, um, Cornell, Stanford, and Lehigh. And when I looked at that list of those five schools, I realized that only two of them could offer athletic scholarship. Ivy League schools don't offer athletic scholarship. They have great financial aid packages, but they don't offer athletic scholarship. And I started thinking about, I don't know why, but the price of tuition and just the sacrifices that my parents have made for me in the sport so far. They paid for me to go to Blair, a school like Blair, and have these opportunities to go to a great school. So it became really important for me late in my career to try to give that back and pass that on to my parents of one, they've sacrificed so much for me in this sport, but I've dedicated a lot of my life to this sport. And for me to go to a school where I'll get school paid for, to take that burden off of my parents was just a proud moment for me. I think it was really important. I think there's a lot of people in the country that use sports as a means to do that. And I started getting geared into that thinking that, man, it'd be really cool to give this back to my parents and show them and share with them how much their sacrifice has meant to me, that I'm going to make this decision because of that. And I will say when I chose Stanford, I think a lot of it was out on a limb. I definitely saw the attraction of sunny California, Stanford obviously being one of the best universities in the world. And I knew that when I told people that I went to Stanford, that their face would light up and they'd probably think pretty highly of me. And at the time, that was really important to me. I really cared a lot about what others thought, and a lot of the decisions I made were kind of based on that. So I chose to go to Stanford and ended up paying off. One thing that we didn't mention at the intro, Pat, is that I did become in Madison Square Garden the first true freshman All-American in Stanford history,
Mm,
which was just really cool for me. Like I said, on my home turf in New York City, feeling like I was at home. But it ended up being a really, really fruitful time for me with being that first year at Stanford, achieving that goal.
hmm. That's awesome. So you wrestled 2 years at Stanford, and what was it like out there?
School was hard. I will say that's the first thing I gotta say. Um, but it was awesome. I loved it. When I pulled on the campus, right, you see people longboarding around, biking around. It's just really an exciting place. You knew that you had really smart peers just walking around the campus that probably were making six figures maybe with a startup or something, and you just knew that you were around some wicked smart people.
Mm,
So I think that was really exciting for me. But after that freshman season, one thing I think that I realized was I'm in a very elite place, and I've pursued a path in my own life of becoming very elite in the sport I love in wrestling. And I felt that there was a disconnect between this elite place that I was in and me not being elite at what I felt I went there for. I knew that when I went to Stanford that I was obviously going for academics as well. But it became apparent to me through that time that really I was just unhappy. I was really far from home, being a Jersey boy out in San Francisco, Palo Alto, sunny California. I missed home a lot, and I think what I found was, I've always been a very self-accountable kind of person. Held myself accountable on little workouts. Tidbit: when I was a kid, I used to have nightly conditioning. Started with 50 push-ups, 50 sit-ups, 15 pull-ups, and I did it every single night. And as I became conditioned to 50, 50, and 15, it became 200, 200, and 100. And there'd be times where, I would be a little too tired getting home from practice. I didn't want to do it. I would go to sleep, and, my mom would wake me up and say, "Did you do your conditioning?" Say, "Yep." She'd be like, "Are you
mm,
sure?" I'd be like, "Nope." And I would go hop on that pull-up bar, do my nightly conditioning, and then get to bed. And I'd say that was early on, right? I needed that nudge, I needed that push, as I think we all do in life. But the my parents helped really instill that self-discipline, self-accountability. So when I was at Stanford, I started doing my own workouts on my own, as I had always done during my career. And in my sophomore year, I found myself oversleeping those workouts, just saying, "Oh, I'll do it later," and never really get it done.
mm,
And these tendencies were just opposite of what I'd been used to, and really just opposite of how I operated, that I figured that there was something wrong. I didn't have nearly as much excitement and joy when I woke up each day, when I went into practice. Um, and I struggled through that time. I
mm,
struggled. I think my wrestling struggled as well. Um, Not on paper, it wouldn't have, because I ended up being seated second at the NCAA's that year. And I got upset, ended up not All-Americaning. But I think just those
Mm.
burdens that I was carrying in life were seeping into my wrestling, and I didn't realize it at the time. So after that national tournament, when I didn't place, I decided it was time to really confront what I was feeling and get to the bottom of it. Go on a little self-reflection, soul searching, and find out why I was feeling the way I was. And through that time, I realized that I'd made a lot of decisions in my life to make other people happy for me, and less more so of me making decisions that would make me happy for myself. And I realized I was unhappy at Stanford, but what would people think of leaving a place like Stanford? Any other university is academically inferior, right? Just going off reputation and thoughts. So how would people think of me? What are they going to think when this guy ups and leaves a place to go to some lesser inferior university? Um, but through that process, I started thinking about decisions that I'd made that did make me happy. And choosing to go to Blair was one of them. And that was essentially for the sport of wrestling, right? I had always made good grades. I knew that I had potential opportunity to go to great schools, but wrestling, when I made decisions for wrestling, they had made me happy. Um, so through that deep reflection process, it took me about 2.5 months to really own up to how I was feeling and realize that I needed to make a change. And it may not look good to others, but this is just how I felt. And I need to follow my heart and follow my passions and pursue those. And take a chance, take a risk that I would fully own, right? I knew that when I made this decision, I couldn't look back and be like, well, I knew I had to move forward full fledged with this. So I had to really grow as a man because I had to have a conversation with my Stanford wrestling coaches to ask them to release me to transfer. Now in college sports, there's the transfer portal where an athlete can just decide, I want to transfer and put their name in the portal. They can start being contacted and recruited by other schools. But at the time when I looked to transfer, I had to ask my coaches for a release. And if they said no, I would lose a year of eligibility. So this was a big, really big growth moment for me because I knew that even having this conversation could lose me a year of wrestling of my college career and my college timeline. But it didn't really matter. I knew that if I was honest and I shared my heart in how I was feeling, that my coaches would understand. I had a really good relationship with all of them, and they were all great men. And so I trusted that and went in and really had to own up to how I was feeling and my decision that I wanted to make. And my coaches were really receptive. They were Coach Borelli, Coach Blake, Coach Kelly, Jameel Kelly. They were all very understanding and were supportive in, Joey, we want to support you and whatever feel like you need to do is going to take you to where you want to be. And that really encouraged me and gave me confidence in my decision. And I plainly told them that this is still an option. I still may stay here. I'm not sold out on this program, but I do feel like I need to see what else is out there. And in doing that, I was heavily recruited by Ohio State. I had a really good relationship with some wrestlers on their team. One of them is a household name, Kyle Snyder. He's the same age as me, actually 3 months younger. But he's one of my role models, great friends. And he was at Ohio State, and I just loved being around this guy. His motivation, right? His motivation, just his deep inner drive and commitment to the sport was contagious. I had other guys from Jersey, like Miles Martin, who I'd grown up with wrestling on youth teams and through high school, and just people that I wanted to be around. And a leader like Tom Ryan. I'd seen what he had done from afar, and I really respected him and what he did there. Also, he was a New York boy, so he could relate to that East Coast living
Mm.
and the Jersey side of me. So, but really what it was is when I stepped foot in that room, I felt a draw that was greater than anything that I'd felt up to that point.
Mm.
And I feel like I knew in my heart, my mind, and my gut that that's where I needed to be. Um, and before I actually chose Ohio State, I had a conversation with someone because I was looking at Ohio State, Penn State, Virginia Tech, Iowa, and Lehigh. So all big time programs. And Penn State being the Bama of wrestling. Um, I'm like, man, who, if Nick Saban showed up to the number one recruit's house and he's recruiting him to Alabama, that's pretty hard to say no to, right? Like, and so I'm thinking all this stuff through, but I had a conversation with someone and he shared with me, Joey, you have to make this decision not with just your mind, not with just your heart, not with just your gut, but you need to make this decision where all three are aligned, where all three are telling you to go. And as soon as he said that to me, I knew where I needed to go. I knew I needed to be at Ohio State, to be around that culture, to be around that program. I didn't care that I was going from Stanford to Ohio State academically. That didn't matter to me because I was pursuing what made me happy. I was pursuing my passion, and I was pursuing a team title to go beat Penn State, candidly.
Mm.
Um, but I ended up making that decision. And when I look back at my college career, I wouldn't change it for a thing. I could see myself having gone 4 years at each place. But that in between process of transferring to moving, of thinking about transferring all the way to having the conversation with my coaches to the point of actually going to Ohio State, I think it was such a big part of my personal development and my character and who I am as a man and a person, and having to be independent and taking ownership of my decisions. I think a lot of times up through high school, right, our parents make a lot of decisions for us. And this, I would say, was really the first decision on my own that I had to own to and to really explain on like why I made this decision.
Mm. It was a big one.
Yeah.
You know, when you said school was hard, I was thinking about this Jim Collins podcast that I heard one time when he said, when I was in high school, I was really good at math. And then I went to Stanford and I realized I wasn't very good at math compared to the people at Stanford. It was a great.
It's funny you say that, Pat, because I'll give a little tidbit. I also was really good at math in high school. And when I showed up to Stanford, I retook a math course to kind of just get settled into college, not go for something super crazy. So I retook calculus when I went to Stanford, and I actually got an A plus in the class. And Stanford gives out A pluses, which is a 4.3 on the GPA scale. So my first quarter at Stanford, I took two classes. I took my math class and I took French, and I got an A in French, which was a 4.0, and an A plus in math. So I had a 4.15 GPA my first quarter at Stanford. People would have thought I was a genius. But it's funny because after that point, after that class, I was like, hey, maybe I'll be a math major. I was still trying to figure out what do I want to do with my life. Like, they give you till sophomore year to declare, so I have time to think about it. But I crushed this course. Like, who wouldn't hire a math major? And so I started thinking that until I took multivariable calculus and linear algebra, and I had a 67% in the class, stressed out that I'm about to get a D, and my transcript came out and I had a B plus. So I was pretty ecstatic with how that result turned out, but that class in itself told me, hey, I don't know if a math major is in it for you. These people are smart.
No doubt. So you have a great experience at Ohio State. Um, one of the most exciting matches that I've ever seen, the final match of your college career. So you're done with college. Then what happened?
Yeah, so it's relatively new within the last 10 years of wrestling, but there are these things called regional training centers.
Hmm.
And regional training centers are housed with college programs as a way for postgraduate athletes to pursue the worlds in the Olympics. So they're clubs that are supported by the universities and donors of the universities for us to be role models and mentors to the college programs that we train with, but also to help us live and pursue our goals of becoming a world and Olympic champion. And prior to going to Stanford, between Blair and Stanford, I actually took a year off, a gap year, which is a lot more common now. And I worked for a construction management company in New York City. And I also traveled with Team USA as um, as a developmental athlete, you call them, because I was only 19 years old at the time. So I traveled with Team USA to Croatia, Turkey, Brazil, Cuba, a lot of places I'd never been, and I felt like what it was like to wear the USA on your chest. And it was a really proud feeling to be able to represent my country at the highest stage. And it was really an honor. And it was really exciting to do that. So I knew that when I graduated college, I wanted to pursue these world and Olympic titles. And really, it was only about finding a place of where to do it. So when I was graduating Ohio State, I started reaching out to some RTC coaches, more so on the East Coast. I really, after being out west at Stanford, then to the Midwest in Columbus, I really wanted to make my way back to the East Coast. So I had conversations with Brandon Slay at the PRTC with the Penn and Drexel programs, Kendall Cross with the New York City RTC, which is with the Columbia program, and Ohio State. I had always left it open to remain at Ohio State and train there. But one thing that was really important to me in this decision was my holistic growth and development. One thing that became really important to me and is the most important thing to me in my life right now is my faith. And I really started that journey when I transferred to Ohio State. I learned about what it was like to have a personal relationship with God and Jesus. And that became my rock throughout my time at Ohio State. It helped me overcome a lot of performance anxiety and really just life things. You know, it made my relationships with my family and friends better. I started seeing it pour out into every aspect of my life. So when I was choosing where to go for an RTC, I wanted someone who would lead me. So a coach who was a great leader. And two, I wanted faith to be a big part of that. And then, three was wrestling. Wrestling was really the third thing on the list was that was important to me. It wasn't so much about finding the best partners. When I was at Stanford, I would say I may not have had the best partners. When I went to Ohio State, I had the best partners. But I knew for my growth and development as an athlete, it wasn't so much about those things anymore as I was getting older. It was more about having a leader and a coach that cared about me, not only as a wrestler, but as a person. And I found that in Coach Brandon Slay. Him and I had experience together when I was wrestling for Team USA on my gap year. And so I really formed a relationship with him, and I really always admired what he was doing behind the scenes throughout my college time. And also at the PRTC, I was with two college programs. So I did have more partners. I had the UPenn program, but the Drexel program as well. My sister went to Drexel. And so I knew that Philly was a great place to get closer to home, but still a little far from home. But they had the infrastructure and they were building a culture that was beyond just wrestling. The PRTC, we have core values, we have a mission statement, we have a purpose, a vision, and it really made me feel like I wasn't just wrestling, but I was becoming part of something bigger than just wrestling and just myself that was really pouring into the community. We have a local nonprofit, Beat the Streets, at Philadelphia. And so we work closely with them. We have more of a Philly wrestling ecosystem. And that was really exciting to me as a postgraduate to really impact people through the sport, but beyond the sport. We were going to use the sport of wrestling to impact people, but we knew that that impact would go way beyond the actual sport of wrestling. And our mission at the PRTC is to enrich lives locally and globally through the sport of wrestling. And I think we're doing that locally for sure with the Penn and Drexel programs and the Beat the Streets program, but also globally as we travel as a team, we go overseas, we go visit orphanages, we go do these things because they're important to us and we want to shine that light as bright as we can, even just as wrestlers.
Great. So you get to the PRTC for all the reasons you talked about, and it seems to me that you're I haven't known you that long, but it seems to me that your mindset has continuously changed over time to make you, I mean, fundamentally, you're one of the greatest wrestlers in the world, but it seems to me that your mindset is changing as a result of that environment. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. When you start the sport of wrestling, a lot of people will tell you it's 15% physical, 85% mental, or whatever percentages they give you. And I truly believe where I'm at in the sport, even as a younger wrestler, these things are important to get you over little humps. But I feel like where I'm at in the sport at the international elite level, it's a matter of keeping focused and keeping your mind locked in for as long as you need to be. And I really do believe that the mental side is what separates the champions from the second, third, fifth place guys. And so I've really spent a lot of time recently to work on that mental side, and really accept the things that I can't control, right? The things that are way beyond what I can, and really focus on the things that I can control. And like I said, we have our core values at the PRTC: faith over fear, full effort, struggle well, and serve others. And those things apply to wrestling, but they apply to life. And so I'm always trying to think of these things of like when I'm scared going out onto the mat, right? Like I need to have faith in my coaches, faith in my training, faith in God, faith in my conditioning, my ability to go out there over any fear of what's this guy going to do? Am I not prepared? Of second guessing myself. So really reframing, but also keeping myself of creating little mantras for myself that keep my mind focused going in. One thing people will always tell you, right, when you're really good at something, you're not really thinking, you're just doing. And I actually disagree with that now as I've been working through it. I've noticed a lot more of myself thinking while I'm out on the wrestling mat because our minds are always going. Your mind is always throwing little thoughts in there. Should you do this? I'm tired. Even the littlest thing. I'm not thinking, well, this is what I'm going to do next. My mind is telling me, you're tired. Hold back, right? And so being conscious of those thoughts that are happening are allowing me to have a little bit more control over those things. I can recognize when my mind starts going in that place and then replace it with the mantras that I've created to combat those little thoughts. I think there's a lot of times in wrestling, but really just in life or just in chaotic situations, right? Things that we didn't expect where our mind just goes blank and we don't know what to do, how to handle. But I think that as I'm practicing just, mindfulness, right? And being conscious of what's going on in my own head, it's translating to all aspects of my life. I can notice things mid-match, but I notice even when I'm in a conversation, someone says something that bothers me and I start ruminating about it. I realize I'm like, why are you thinking about that? It's no big deal. What they said doesn't matter, right? Just keep it moving, keep going forward. And so I think it's the mental side has really helped me mature on the wrestling mat, but really in my life, which I'm really grateful for. And there's a lot of people that have helped me with that side of it. I'm very blessed to have the teammates that I do. One of them being prior guest on the most fascinating podcast in the world, Jordan Burroughs, Olympic champion, 6-time world champion, and just a great mentor, right? Man of integrity and honor that lives what he says and just has good wisdom and good insight. Tyler Berger, Dave McFadden, Mark Hall, Doug Zaff. I have people around me that are continually pouring into me, and we're always looking to sharpen each other's minds. We talk about, hey, what were you thinking when you did this? Well, hey, maybe let's try to think about this. And so we're encouraging each other, we're sharing our experiences. And I think through all of that, we're reaching this group flow that is allowing us to connect on a deeper level than just coach athlete relationship, teammate, but really as brothers and family.
So 2 years ago, you get this idea that you want to go to Kazakhstan. Can you tell me about the planning for that originally?
Yeah. So last year in 2022, I was at the World Championships as a training partner with Seth Gross, and I was looking ahead at the international calendar of events for the rest of the year. The World Championships were in September, so I wanted to try to get a competition in before 2022 year end. I saw on the calendar that there was a competition in Taraz City, Kazakhstan. It was called the Kunayet. But when you clicked on the event, there was absolutely no schedule for the event. So there was no information. All there was a name, a date, and a city. So with that information, it was pretty hard to start planning what to do because we didn't even know where we needed to go and how much it would be per day, accommodations. There's a lot of logistics that go into an international trip. So while I was at the World Championships, I started going up to anybody that had a Kazakhstan sweatsuit on. And I showed them my phone, showing them Kunaya, Taraz City with the dates. And I just asked everybody from Kazakhstan that I met, do you have information on this tournament? Do you have information on this competition? Nobody had information, but what they were doing was extending their WhatsApp phone numbers and also Instagrams so I could keep in touch as we left. They were telling me it was September at the time. The competition date was listed for the first week in November, but they told me it's too far away from the competition for information, which doesn't make sense. It's 2 months away. That should have been 2 months ago. But I'd say, so after that, I went home and I was just honestly praying about it. I was praying that the Lord would open the doors for me to go on this trip, that I really wanted to go there. But I needed these people to respond. I needed to find out the information before I could make it happen. Well, it turned out about 3 weeks before the competition, from one of the WhatsApp numbers I was sent one document, and the document was the tournament regulations, but in Russian. So I started reaching out to anybody I knew that spoke Russian and English so that they could translate it for me so that I had the information. And from there, I put together a proposal for our national club sponsor, and I had to share it with USA Wrestling as well because they weren't supporting a trip. But I ended up working with the coaches and the people that I'd gotten their contacts with to get the information on the competition, set up logistics, our transportation, where we were staying, how much we needed to pay. And my teammate and I, Tyler Berger, made the trek last year out to Kazakhstan for the Kunaev tournament. And it was awesome. It was awesome. They treated us like family. We were the first Americans that a lot of the people in this village had ever seen, which was just a really cool feeling. There were kids at the event that were just bombarding us for selfies, photos, memories, gear that they could have, asking for our singlets, our jackets, our shoes, our bags. They wanted anything that we were wearing at the time. But it was just really cool and eye-opening to see these different parts of the world and just recognize and realize how blessed we are in the United States, and keeping that perspective. I'd say that's one of the things that I love about what I do in my job is the ability to travel the world to some of the most remote places where you wouldn't necessarily vacation to Taraz, Kazakhstan, or Siberia, Russia, for that matter. But to have these experiences and really perspective on just life and how amazing we do really have it here in the United States.
Agreed. So this year comes around and you're thinking about going to the tournament again, and you get contacted by a coach of another wrestler. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So with that story, right, I felt that I had put a lot of legwork into making this trip happen. And when it really comes down to it, I know that it was all because of God. But my pride started telling me, you did all this. You said nobody would be able to go to this competition if it weren't for you. And the other caveat for the competition that was awesome because it's very rare is that the tournament in Kazakhstan gives a cash award for on stand. So for the first, second, and third place athletes. And there aren't many competitions throughout the world or not even in the United States that give cash on the stand. So it was just a great opportunity not only to compete against some of the best wrestlers in the world, but also to make some money doing it, right? We all love to make a little money doing what we love. So that was a fun little caveat. But when I was reached out to, I'd say that my pride really set in and I became like jealous, a little animosity towards and just prideful in that, man, why should I even share this information? Like, I figured it all out. I found a way, can't they do the same? But back to the mental side that we were talking about is that I recognize my mind going to these places and the feelings that I was feeling. And there's one thing that I've clung to recently. It says the feelings may be real, but the story isn't. And what that means to me in this context is I felt, right? I felt slighted. I felt prideful. I felt these things, but the story that I was creating in my mind was all about me. It was all about me and what I did to do it. And where the real story was, I may feel this way, but this is an opportunity, right? I want to invite the best wrestlers to this competition because I want to be the best. And if I want to be the best, I have to beat the best and be willing to take on those challenges. And so I was able to recognize what was going on in my mind and really change that and take that emotional feeling that I was having out of how I dealt with the situation. And I felt like I dealt with it pretty well. I had to change my mindset. At first, it was, someone that I compete against all the time. Like, man, part of it was fear, right? I don't want this guy to be there. I don't want to wrestle it But then I started realizing those things. I'm like, well, what do I want? If I want these things, then I got to be willing. I got to be ready, and I got to put myself in these situations. And I can't control whether they're going, whether they're not going. All I can control is my attitude towards this right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I really geared my thinking towards that. And I think it really helped me going into the competition. I still had nerves and anxiety flow in, of course, but I had already made my decision about how I felt about the situation. And I was welcoming it. I was accepting it. I was ready
Mm-hmm.
for it to happen. And I think that once it did, it made it a lot easier for me to deal with.
Mm-hmm. It's such an interesting story. I'm glad you told me.
Yeah.
So I feel like you're ready to do great things. Like, what are your goals right now when you think about the next year?
Yeah, well, this upcoming year is a big one. We have the 2024 Olympic trials in April. Prior to that, in about 3 weeks here, we have the qualification tournament for the Olympic trials in Fort Worth, Texas on December 16th and 17th. I have to go take top 5 there to qualify for Olympic trials. And then in April at Penn State, I'll have to win the Olympic trials to be on the U.S. Olympic team. So that's the main focus, pretty laser focus. There's 2 domestic competitions that are really important. And in the meantime, in between that 4-month, 4.5-month span, I'll do a few international competitions to just stay ready, continue to get reps, more data, and keep on working on the things that I'm looking to improve upon for the season.
Mm-hmm. So, how do you think about your goals? Do you think in terms of, I want to be a gold medalist at the Olympics? Is that your goal? Is it one tournament at a time? Like, how do you decide what to focus on?
Yeah, that's great. I have the long-term goal for sure. Long-term as in 5, 6 months. It's not really long-term. But right, that long-term goal. But one thing that I've just really been focused in my mind, like I have my goals, I write down my goals every day, but my focus is on the here and now. And that's my daily reminder, my daily mantra to myself is, you know, rely on God's strength moment by moment. It's a moment by moment thing. It's a here and now type thing. The more I'm thinking into the future, the more I'm thinking into the past, the less I'm here and present, the more I'm missing out on things that are happening right in front of me. And that's all I can control. And so I have my goals, but I'm trying to focus on the controllables of being present here and now in whatever I'm doing. I'm doing a podcast, if I'm reading, if I'm having a conversation with one of the Penn or Drexel wrestlers, with my coach, anything, watching a video, right? I want to give my attention, have my focus, be there fully, and be focusing on the here and now.
That's awesome. Is there anything you might like to ask me or tell me that we haven't talked about today?
No, I don't think so. I dislike when I don't have a question for you though, Pat, because I know you're a big question guy. I feel like my reputation takes a hit when I don't have a question for you.
No, not at all. So I'm excited to see how things play out for you over the next 5 or 6 months. Um, I feel like so much of it is mental at this point, and as you know, I take it one day at a time. So I really liked what you said about one moment at a time, because I feel like the biggest gift that we can give each other is just being present in the moment and totally connecting with another person. And if that other person is us, even if we're alone or if we're on a wrestling mat and given that our total focus, I struggle with it, candidly, but
Yeah.
but it's my main focus. And when I depart from it, I'm at my worst. And when I'm focused on it, I'm at my best. I feel like we're making progress.
1% better every day. That's it. Small strides.
Amen. Well, thank you so much for your time, and I will definitely see you soon.
Definitely see you soon. Thanks, Pat. Really
You got it.
appreciate it.
Have a great day. Bye-bye. If you enjoy the most fascinating podcast in the world, please follow on Spotify, subscribe on YouTube, and follow on Apple Podcast.